I've had several of you ask if I'm feeling better, and the answer is absolutely yes. Feeling better, yes. I've described it as the last few days before Saturday, uh, when I would talk, it sounded like a tambourine or something in my ear. It just rattled to the point where it just didn't want to talk. And they gave me medicine, and she said, as bad as it was, she said it will probably be 4 days before you notice anything. And that was Saturday, so I'm starting to get better. I still don't. I'm not hearing great out of this left ear. So if you're over here, yeah, yell at me tonight. And if I still don't hear you, it just was a bad point, and you just think you don't get any credit for it. So yeah, everybody on this side liked it. I heard that laugh in that ear. But anyway, I'm glad to be back. But I was just not able to be here Sunday, and I hate that. And but we'll be back tonight and back together on Sunday as well. Lessons are ready to go for Sunday, and I hope you. I look forward to you being here with us. We have spent a lot of time over the last couple of months talking about miracles of Jesus, and tonight we'll still put this in the miracles of Jesus category. Jesus does perform. Our focus tonight is going to be almost on the miracle, but more on the debate, the argument, the back and forth between Jesus and the Pharisees regarding regarding the topic of blasphemy. And we'll deal with that. That'll be sort of the bulk of our discussion this evening. If you want, go ahead and turn to Matthew chapter 12. Tonight, our lesson is in Matthew 12, Mark chapter 3, and Luke chapter 11. But we will almost entirely be in Matthew chapter 12 for us. So if you're there, then you should be in the right spot for the majority of our time together this evening. Titling this, as you can see there, is our 12th lesson, The Blind, Mute, and Demon-Possessed Man. Again, that's who Jesus is going to heal in this conversation this evening. But there's really not much about the person. There's very little about it in Matthew chapter 12. But this miracle sort of funnels into a whole lot of red letters in your Bible, where Jesus will sort of give an exposition, as it were, about sort of dealing with what the Pharisees had talked with him about. So to start with, though, that debate is regarding blasphemy against the Holy Spirit. And we'll get to that a little bit more, a little bit later on. But the controversy here, why this debate is even held, is not new to us. We've seen this sort of hinted at, things sort of thrown out that have been presented by the Pharisees quite often. What was one of the main accusations that we've seen the Jewish leaders put on Jesus with regards to healing? On the Sabbath. That was probably the main argument. A couple weeks ago, we had that discussion of things to do and things not to do on the Sabbath, and how it became very traditional. It got very technical. Well, this tonight, there's a man brought to him who was blind, who was mute, who couldn't speak, and he was also possessed with a demon. And I just want to ask this question because there's very little about this miracle beyond just that simple bit of information. But I want to ask you this right now. And I want you to show by a show of hands, 1 or 2 or 3. We'll let blindness be 1, inability to speak be 2, and demon possessed be 3. Which of the 3 do you think would be the worst? 1, 2, or 3? Okay. Okay. All right. So that's what the school teachers call an overt response, where I look and see what you say, and then we build off of it. All right. Well, I would say 75% of you said 3, which was demon possessed. And I understand that. But if you want to, one of you that was a 3, tell me why. Only if you were a 3, though. Uh-huh. Sure. Mm-hmm. Okay. Right. 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 Makes sense. Did I have anybody who was a 2 who said mute? You think that being unable to speak would be the worst? I thought I saw Linda's hand go up on that one back there. Linda's hand was straight up, so if you couldn't talk, but it would be right. And I know we have things that the sign language, and we can write things, but it's still a hindrance there. What about blindness? I saw a couple of 1s. Oh, why would you? What was your reasoning for that? Yeah. Sure. Mary. So I don't know. I don't know that in demon possession as it's presented in the Bible. I think everybody seems to realize that they were. I know things that I've read even today, which could pull us a little closer to even thing. And Isaac Hall talked about this a while back, and it's not necessarily the same as mental illness, but I do feel like that's as close as relation to that is some form of mental illness. And I know people that even suffer from those kind of things will say things like, I just wish I didn't have to deal with this, or something like that. There's not a right answer to this. These are negative choices, all 3. But the point of this is, I didn't see any of you hold up a 1, a 2, and a 3. And that's what this man was dealing with, which would have been just most of us, just picking one of these sounded terrible. Ben, are you trying to figure out how to hold up those fingers like that? It's like, I didn't know. So, all right. But our lesson tonight is not really found in the miracle, which it's kind of funny to say that the miracle of curing a man who was blind, mute, and demon possessed is almost like a non-entity or insignificant here. But rather in the discussion that Jesus has with the Pharisees about the nature of healing. And that's what our focus is going to be more on this evening. We'll get to a picture early. This picture looks really old. It's not that old. It was late 1800s, but it's in Brooklyn, of the man that is blind and mute there. But you can see the man in the picture looks very pitiful in what it is, if you can see it well or not. Matthew chapter 12 is where we are, is where our target is for this evening. Yeah. Sure. 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 Tom. How old was, I guess, when was he born? Maybe how old would he have been? Okay. And what Tom there described as making some kind of sign and then him feeling of your hand as you did it, but which is, yeah. And so, with anything, you can kind of learn to cope with it, but it would certainly have been a challenge for anybody to deal with this for sure. Annette, do you care to read for us this evening? Matthew chapter 12, just verses 22 through 24. All right. Now, I told you that the miracle was quick. I mean, it's almost to the point now where we're just, you're fixed. One sentence, and that's about all you get right here. But what three problems did we say? What did we say? What's the man's three problems? Blind, mute, demon possessed. I told you to rate them. You figure out which one is worse. I don't know what his answer to that would have been, but let's just say all of them would have been bad. But when in that first verse, verse 22, when Jesus heals him, we read there on the back end of the verse, what was the man able to do? Said he spoke and he saw, right? He spoke and he saw. And we saw last week when the widow of Nain, her son was dead, Jesus sort of put his hand on him, right, and told him to rise up. So the short amount of time that we see within this verse, it seems that Jesus healed him how? Instantly, expedient, right? Really quickly, right then and there. And so this man would be able to speak and able to see, and then we'll assume the demon possession was gone there as well. There's two sort of categories of people that were witness to this. Now, last week, we had the people who were traveling with Jesus, and we had the people who were in the funeral procession that were crossing paths. This week's a little different, but we have people that fall in one of two categories. Category number one, call this the multitude. What question did the multitude ask in response to what Jesus did? They said, could this be the son of David? Now, that's the question. At the first part of verse 23, it said that the multitude was what? They were amazed. Well, I suspect that if we had been in that crowd, most of us would have fell into that multitude group because you just saw a person demon-possessed, couldn't speak, couldn't see, who basically started talking. Everything was fixed right then. That was amazing. There was a second group. This was the Pharisees. What did they say about what Jesus had done? Verse 24. Yeah, verse 24, it said the Pharisees heard it. They said, this fellow does not cast out demons except by what? Beelzebub, the ruler of the demons. So there's two categories right here that take place. And so you could fall into one of the two. It's interesting to see how the people fall. Now, I want to talk about this just a little bit because the first group said that Jesus was the son of David, or at least this man. They don't necessarily utter Jesus. We don't see that, but we see that could this be the son of David. Not necessarily a name, but a son of David. So I want to think about what this means. I apologize for this being smaller. Hopefully you can see it. In some cases, this one in particular, people tended to react with either fear, not scared, but we've used this word before, fear or awe. What was the word that was used tonight in verse 23? Amazed. I think that falls under fear and awe, right? Ella's favorite song, number 147, is I Stand Amazed in the Presence. I think that word amazed, you could change that word, I stand in fear in the presence. I stand in awe of the presence. And that song might not rhyme as well, but it would be the same meaning. And so those people were quite in awe. This time, though, they kind of start to make a connection. And I'm not sure that other people haven't made this before, but this is the 12th miracle that we see. But it's almost like, as a cartoon, a light bulb flashes. And the people say, wait a minute. Could this be the son of David? Not the literal son, because the literal son would have been, this is Joseph's son, but could this possibly be the long-promised Messiah, the Savior of Israel? Now, notice in verse 23 there, it ends with a question mark. I don't think they necessarily solved that problem, but they're thinking, all the evidence is kind of leaning in a certain direction. The son of David, this name was a title reserved for the Messiah or the Savior. It came from God's promise to David to establish his throne over Israel forever. If you go to 2 Samuel chapter 7 and verse 16, that's almost word for word. It's just one sentence that he would establish his throne over Israel forever. Again, this is not Israel, a country. This is Israel, the group of people, the Jewish people right there. Because of Isaiah's prophecies, many Israelites likely associated this with what he was doing. Isaiah talks about that in chapter 35 and verse 5, things like healing the blind, the deaf, the lame, the mute, etc. Well, what's Jesus been doing? That's kind of what he's been doing, and they just witnessed a little bit of this right here. And so, like we said, it's like everything is starting to make sense now. You're at the end of the movie, and you've seen all these strings come together into one. Since Jesus was accomplishing each of these kinds of things, those who witnesses are starting to make that connection. I don't know if this question of, or this statement, son of David, had been uttered before. We've not seen it in our miracle studies, but we're probably far enough along that it makes sense. Now, that was the word that the multitude used. What was the word that the Pharisees used? They said he was healing from who? All right. So who is this then? How many of you have heard the name Beelzebub before? Ben, Bohemian Rhapsody, right? The Queen song, right before, Wayne and Garth start popping their heads. But Ben. Yeah. Sometimes it's Lord of like flying or flies, but flies go to that. But this was a name used in Matthew chapter 12 to represent Satan or the devil. Now, this concept of Satan and the devil is not used a ton in the Old Testament. We don't really see it a lot. But the concept of there being sort of a ruler of bad or evil sort of existed in almost every entity. Okay, the word Satan, the word Satan comes from the Greek, I think. These are words that are translated, of course. But there was a lot of names attributed to Satan, and typically those names connected to other groups of people in the area with some type belief in some type of eternal punishment. Now, there's a lifetime of study that can go on in this, and I find it kind of interesting, sort of this concept of it. But the point of this is to show that when Jesus, and we're going to talk a little bit about this on Sunday night, Jesus lived in a multi-ethnic society. There were a lot of people in Israel and a lot of different religious backgrounds. And when you uttered a name, Satan, well, that name might not resonate with people, but the concept did. Like Ben said there, Beelzebub, Beelzebul, sometimes you'll see it as well, is derived from the Philistine god. It's often associated with the Canaanite god, Baal, as well. Point of this, though, was simply to show you what they're making reference to. Any questions about either of those before we go further? Absolutely. It says he does not cast out demons except by Beelzebub. The crowd here is going to hear that, and they're going to say, whoa, I don't want any part of this. Jesus is going to go this way, then I'm going to go that way. That's the theory, right? Well, what have we seen the Pharisees, these Jewish leaders, already do several times in these miracle studies? Okay. Explain them away, discredit, and they've used a lot of different things. They got technical. They said, you can't heal on the Sabbath day, right? And Jesus sort of shot that down. And so that's not going to work, right? Well, maybe now, Jesus is of the devil. So they're not going to want to hang out with him. But if they stop hanging out with Jesus, they're going to naturally gravitate back to where? To the Jewish leaders, to the temple, to the Pharisees right there. And so you're trying to convince somebody to sort of come over to you. But here's the thing. You don't really have anything positive to convince them with. How many of you have ever seen political commercials, but when they come on, the only thing on the political commercial is saying bad about the other person? Well, those clearly work or they wouldn't use them. But it would be nice to hear somebody say what I'm going to do rather than what she's not going to do or something like that. Well, that's kind of what we see right here, right? They're saying all the bad things about Jesus. In a sense, they're almost saying, we're not real good either, but we're better than him. Come back over here to our side. You were going to say something. Sure. Uh-huh. Right. Right. Let's go further. Now, we're going to look at each of these verses sort of individually because in reality, Jesus makes 4 arguments here over the course of 5 verses. But I want to look at Matthew 12, 25 through 29. And this is all words or teaching of Jesus. Boo, do you care to read this one? All right. Now, I want to look at these in sort of 4 different things. So if I can ask you something, let's only focus on the one verse for the moment, okay? If there was something that you liked toward the end of what Boo read, hold on to that for just a second. But Jesus knew their thoughts and said to them, every kingdom divided against itself is brought to desolation. Every city or house divided against itself will not stand. If Satan cast out Satan, he is divided against himself. How then will his kingdom stand? This statement was altered slightly by Abraham Lincoln in probably one of his more famous speeches as well. But what happens here? What is Jesus saying? What happens when a kingdom or a city or a house is divided against itself. Falls apart. Right. Okay. So when Abraham Lincoln said it, he's talking about a northern and southern United States that were about to break apart. I don't know what was George Jones saying when he said we live in a 2-story house, right? Same kind of thing. There's your old school music reference for you right there. But it's not going to stand, right? It's going to break apart right there. And so, therefore, if Satan, who they're saying, well, Jesus is from Beelzebub, but he's casting out a devil, right? So he's casting out this demon. If Satan cast out Satan, he's divided against himself. What's going to happen to his kingdom? It's going to fall apart. Why would Satan or one of Satan be casting something out of someone presented by Satan, right? It doesn't make sense, right? The opposite would be why it would make more sense for something of God to remove something. That's two against each other. Or thoughts before we go further? They're going to take you out. Yeah. Right. Right. You don't want to be fighting against yourself. All right. So that's Jesus' first argument. Number 2, he said, and if I cast out demons by Beelzebub, by whom do your sons cast him out? Therefore, they shall be your judges. So Jesus asked the Pharisees here, he said, if I cast them out by the power of Satan, who are your sons casting them out? What do you think? Right. So Jesus said, therefore they shall be your judges. What does that mean? What does he mean there when he says the sons will be your judges? So I think what we see here is this word sons really just means followers, the people that are, if he's the son of David, if he's the son of God, then these are followers. These sons of them are followers as well. But they pretended then or claimed to cast out demons themselves. But if they're casting them out, then they're casting them out by Satan as well. And so therefore their own followers would be judging them for doing it for the wrong reason as well. So if these Jewish leaders who theoretically could pull out these demons, if it was being done by Satan, then they're doing it wrong as well, is the argument that Jesus is making. It's complex. I will fully grant you that. And it's complex in the sense that, like, we don't really have anything that jives with this today. Argument number 3. But if I cast out demons by the Spirit of God, surely then the kingdom of God has come upon you. So what Jesus is saying here, he didn't cast them out by the power of Satan. You all said that, not him. He said, I'm not doing this. I didn't cast them out by the power of Satan. He said, then therefore they have to be cast out by the power of God. If it's not by Satan, because you're saying that it is, but if you're saying that that's how it's done, then you're saying you're wrong. He's saying, then it was done by God. And therefore I am the Son of God. That's what Jesus is saying. So what's the counter argument to that? If Satan can't cast out or wouldn't cast out demons of his own, then Jesus says, I have to be of God. And you've seen me pull this demon out, and I've just explained to you why I did it. Then what does that mean? Jesus is saying, I'm the what? I'm the Son of God. How do you counter that argument? It's really difficult. Number 4. Or how can one enter a strong man's house and plunder his goods unless he first binds the strong man, and then he will plunder his home? What do you read in that when it says they must bind a strong man? You have to overpower, right? There are people that you and I know that we probably would be ill-advised to try and rob their home, right? For various reasons. It might be weapons that they would have, but it might just be sheer that person standing in the door means I'm probably not getting into it. And so in order to take from that man, what would you have to do? You got to be stronger than him. You got to figure out a way to sort of bind him down to show that you have the power, that you have the strength to be able to take something. How does that statement relate to cleansing this man of an evil spirit? This last question was what we were hoping to get to. And I knew it was going to be really difficult because it's a complicated thing. But the last point, the final point, is what we're trying to get to there, is that Jesus is saying that I am strong enough to take this demon-possessed man and heal him. I am strong enough to overcome Satan. What was God's purpose for sending Jesus? To seek and save the lost from a dying world, right? Well, do what? And overcome Satan, right? So that was the whole point of it. But could Jesus do that if he was not strong enough? I don't mean physically strong in the way we're thinking of, but if he was incapable of having that kind of strength to overcome, could he do it? No, he couldn't. And so that's where our goal here was trying to get us to. Right. 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 Other thoughts on this? We've had 11 lessons that maybe have been a little easier to decipher than this one, and I apologize, but I wanted us to see it. A little bit of truth in that right there. Let's go a little further, though, because Jesus isn't done talking for this. So this is Matthew 12, verses 30 through 32. Melvin, if you could read this. So when Jesus is talking to the Pharisees here, and that's where the main focus of these 31 and 32 are going to be. I guess we have our lessons to leave with. We're splitting it in two tonight. The first one, in the spiritual conflict between Jesus and Satan, Jesus is saying there's two sides, right? In most things, there's more than two sides, right? There's this side, and there's something in the middle, you know? My way is the way I think it should be, but I got a little bias in my way. And your way is way you should be. It's probably somewhere in the middle. But he's saying in this conflict here between the two, there's only two sides. I tried to set that up at the beginning by saying, how did the people react to Jesus' miracle? Half of them, I don't want half of them, part of the group said what? Son of David. I am amazed and wowed by what I saw. The other people said what? He's of the devil, okay? Now, those people that said that, well, Jesus says, well, every individual is either going to gather or going to scatter. If you have ever had a child, this makes perfect sense because Mary and I would gather all the toys into a bucket or a basket or wherever, and Will would walk in the room, and 2 minutes later, all the toys were where? Scattered, okay? Well, I wouldn't have been gathering if I just wanted him to scatter. But there's a big difference in gathering and scattering, right? And so the argument is you're either gathering or scattering. So he says gathering falls under which group? Under Jesus. As Jesus gathers what? His disciples or the sheep, right? He says, or scatters. Why does scatters fall under Satan? He divides. Because that wolf that goes into the group of sheep, what's the goal of the wolf? To separate, right? Just to separate, to pull them aside from one to the other. The Pharisees had witnessed this unbelievable miracle, and they responded how? That's not how they respond. How did they respond to this miracle? They said it was by who? He said it was by Satan, right? And they said that based on what logic? That they were so against Jesus, they couldn't bear the thought of seeing something that half the people, or at least part of the people in the crowd, had just said, wow, this is something else. Nope. Had to be from the devil. Now, when Jesus says that, he's calling those people what? What was he calling those Pharisees? Starts with a B. He was accusing them, maybe, calling them blasphemers, right? He's accusing them of blasphemy. And what he's saying there is that their hearts were so evil that they could not even begin to think that Jesus had done this as the Son of God, because that was taking power away from them. And in many ways, I think that's what this discussion here that Jesus, just a couple verses about blasphemy right here, that it's going to be hard to forgive that, right? Because they're in the witness, they're in the seeing, they're in the literal presence of where Jesus was. The Jewish leader said what? Couldn't be God. Couldn't be God. Even though this is not the first miracle. This was the what miracle? It's 12th one, right? So it's not, I can maybe see it on the first miracle, but there's been enough happening to where it makes it hard for them to see. Oh, it could have been, yeah. Right. Well, yeah, I was going to say, hold on just a second, Ben. Why don't you read verses 33 through 37, and you can just finish that point off real good. All right. So I wanted to stop Ben for a second so he could read a little bit more right there, because you're exactly that. When you said you're either a gatherer or a scatterer, that's showing what our fruit is, right? That's showing what our fruit is. And if fruit's good, the tree's what? The tree's good. Fruit's bad, the tree's what? The tree's bad is there as well. He compares himself to the tree, told the Pharisees to make the tree and its fruit the same. Either both were good or both were evil. And that mouth that he speaks from is what Ben read there in verse 36 and 37 said that's those things that we say are going to be what judges us, indicate whether our character is good or our character is evil. Now, that's where we're stopping this evening. But if you're still in Matthew chapter 12, I want you to look down at the next verse, verse 38. Now, I am fully aware that the Bible and the books in the Bible were not necessarily written as this happened at noon and this happened at 1 and this happened at 2, that there may be some time. But please look with me at verse 38. Then some of the scribes and Pharisees answered, saying, Teacher, we want to see a sign from you. Now, I don't know if that was immediately after, but that's a really interesting comment to make after the 17 verses that we've just read tonight, right? Because what had Jesus done right at the beginning? Yeah, it's like, well, he was blind and couldn't speak, and he had a demon possessed, and then you explained it. But, I tell you what, we'd like to see a sign. How does Jesus respond in 30 years, 39 or 40? Yeah, he said an evil and perverse generation there. You aren't looking for us. You're just looking for something else to fuss about right there. Thank you for, do we have any comments or anything before we stop? Right. And I think Jesus is, in a somewhat complicated series of verses, Jesus was really clear in pointing out whose heart was in the right place and whose was. I don't know that this is the easiest thing to study, and I might have broke it down a little too in depth for us tonight anyway, too. But I do think that Jesus is pointing out sort of the right and wrong of their hearts there, as it were. 3 months ago, we had the first lesson. And you all, somebody, Boo, I think, asked, she said, what's next week's going to be about? And I said, stilling the storm. And then I went home and I was like, no, I don't want to do it. I want to do it in chronological order. So, Boo, you want to ask the question? What's next week about? Stilling the storm. So it's been 3 months ago that I said